Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to explore a peculiar and unexpected period of history, the War of Jenkins' Ear. It's not about epic conflicts or heroic tales, but rather a tiny portion of history that astounded the entire globe. A misplaced ear led to a protracted conflict between two of the most powerful empires of the 18th century, which may seem like a little old story. But believe me, this is one of the most bizarre incidents in history. Please feel free to hit like or subscribe if you like this kind of content. Little gestures like yours really assist me in continuing to provide interesting stories. Please leave a comment below if you would like me to know where you are listening from and what time it is there. I adore how these vibrant historical narratives foster connections among our small, international society. Now, as we begin this amazing voyage, let's unwind together. Turn on a soft fan to chill the room, and lower the lights. We'll look at how a seemingly insignificant incident, like a captain losing an ear, could alter the path of history and why you might not make it through even a day in the untamed, raging waters of that time. Have you ever heard the tale of a man who, because of a piece of his ear, became the focus of a war? Otherwise, prepare yourselves, because this is the tale of Robert Jenkins, an English captain who was unknown until the day his ear suddenly vanished. And that event altered the course of history forever. Robert Jenkins was just a regular sailor in 1730, navigating a cargo ship through the choppy and pirate-infested waters of the Caribbean. He was neither a well-known explorer nor a pirate captain. He was a sea creature, molded by countless days spent fighting the fury of the sea. Imagine a strong man with a thick, weather-beaten beard, a worn sailor's cap that is slightly slanted from years of use, and a face scarred by the salty winds and the sun. There was a hardened gravity in his eyes, the look of a man who had seen both adversaries and storms. Jenkins stood out, though, because of something very peculiar. A portion of his ear was gone. Yes, a terrible tragedy at sea had permanently destroyed a portion of his ear. Why is losing a portion of an ear such a big deal? You may be asking yourself. It might seem insignificant now, but in the 18th century, it was very different. A guy who lost a portion of his ear was viewed as unlucky in those days. And occasionally, he was even made fun of or thought to be dishonorable. It was an obvious sign of bad luck, a disgrace that could destroy a man's reputation. Robert Jenkins, however, refused to let that stigma define him. Rather, he transformed it into a potent emblem, something unexpected. Even weirder is the fact that Jenkins retained the bit of his ear that had been cut off, carefully wrapped in a tiny box. This dreadful artifact was never abandoned. Jenkins always took that tiny piece of flesh with him. Whether he was attending parliamentary sessions or judicial proceedings, for Jenkins, it was a treasure, physical evidence of the injustice he endured, a reminder of Spanish brutality, and a means of demanding justice. But to many, it was a sickening memento. The ear that went lost has a horrific and strange backstory. While traveling through the Caribbean, an area that was a raging furnace of colonial rivalry between European powers, Jenkins' ship was captured by the Spanish Navy. The harsh reality of the open sea, the danger of pirates, and Spain's tight control over its territories were the only things depicted. No artificial effects or movie sets. A Spanish officer, possibly agitated by personal issues or annoyed by the sailors' jeering, took a knife and severed a portion of Jenkins's ear during an inspection on his ship. This was an insult intended to intimidate. Not only a violent act, the ear cut served as a reminder that Jenkins and his crew were not welcome, and that the Spanish had absolute control over these waterways. Jenkins was in more than just bodily pain. In a society where honor and reputation were crucial, losing a body part to an enemy was a profound humiliation and a sign of weakness. However, Jenkins seemed unfazed by this horrible deed. Rather, he clung to that fragment of his ear as though it were the greatest prize, evidence that Britain and the Spanish had betrayed him. Picture this scenario. A man appears in court with a small box in his hand, displaying the severed portion of his ear as proof. It was a strong, almost dramatic move that evoked feelings of fury. Jenkins was more than just a victim. He came to represent rebellion and resistance. Anger was stoked, and calls for military action against Spain were made using the ear as a political weapon. Despite the incident's modest beginning, it had far-reaching effects. The War of Jenkins' Ear, a protracted battle between England and Spain that influenced control of Caribbean trade routes, was sparked by Jenkins's narrative. How would you respond if you were in Jenkins' position? Would you hold on to such a graphic reminder of suffering and shame? Would you try to put the past behind you and move on? Or would you use it as a weapon to fight back? Jenkins' decision to always wear that amputated ear was both courageous and odd, demonstrating how minor hardships can occasionally spark more significant conflicts. His tale serves as a reminder that history isn't always about heroic figures or momentous occasions. Occasionally, it involved common people, insignificant events, and oddities that have the power to alter the trajectory of entire countries. The improbable components that drove two empires to war were a man's resolve, a box, and an ear. The incomplete ear captain, Robert Jenkins, started a tale that nobody could have foreseen. A national cause swiftly emerged from what began as a personal tragedy. Additionally, as we follow Jenkins's voyage, we will witness a world full of intense naval combat, dramatic parliamentary discussions, and the unpredictable existence of sailors on the untamed oceans. Are you prepared to enter Robert Jenkins' world? A world where political aspirations collided with personal suffering, where a missing ear had the power to upend entire empires, and where history was etched in blood, bravery, and surprising turns. What did the Caribbean Sea actually look like in the 1730s? Don't think of a tropical paradise with languid beach days and serene blue waves. Rather, this was a tumultuous environment, a crucible of rivalry and strife. The resource-rich islands and sea lanes were the focus of intense competition between European powers, including France, Spain, England, and others. Each nation moved its pieces warships, privateers, and commerce vessels in an attempt to assert dominance on the ocean, which resembled a chessboard. No ship could travel freely in these hazardous waters without running the risk of being inspected, seized, or attacked. In addition to pirates, imperial nations' navies also prowled the sea, each keen to defend its interests and exact revenge on competitors. Robert Jenkins, an unassuming English commander whose destiny would be permanently linked to one tragic die-a-day that appeared routine but would alter history, entered this dangerous field. A Spanish warship unexpectedly loomed on the horizon. As Jenkins navigated his cargo ship through these hot waters, Jenkins was told to stop for inspection as the cruiser bore down. Spanish officials were on the lookout for foreign ships that might be trespassing or smuggling in their claimed seas. Therefore, this was standard procedure. The attitude of the Spanish officer in charge, however, was what set this halt apart. Picture the officer's severe face, possibly already weighed down by personal issues. According to some, he had just received a reprimand for family matters, or had suffered a significant loss from gambling the previous evening. Whatever the reason, he was less patient than normal and had a short fuse. His annoyance exploded. Instead of carrying out the inspection with the usual professionalism, the officer pulled out a knife and ruthlessly severed a portion of Jenkins's ear in an unjustified outburst of rage. Imagine the scene. A man's body was disfigured on a ship's deck, while the unending sea watched in the hot Caribbean heat. In that moment, the shock of injury, the abrupt anguish, and the embarrassment all blended together, Jenkins must have experienced a wave of rage and powerlessness as he dealt with the psychological fallout from such an insult, in addition to the bodily injuries. This was an attack on a man's respect and dignity, not merely his physical appearance. These kinds of injuries were highly stigmatized in 18th century culture. A man was viewed as unfortunate or even dishonorable if he lost a portion of his ear. It was a symbol of weakness that was to be ridiculed. This was a severe setback for sailors, whose reputations frequently meant everything in the close-knit maritime community. Jenkins, however, was a tough cookie. Instead of concealing the wound or giving up, he took an exceptional step and meticulously maintained the portion of his ear that had been cut off. He kept it with him everywhere, wrapped in a little box. This gruesome memento was more than just an interesting artifact. It was a concrete representation of the brutality and injustice of Spain. Imagine Jenkins traveling from one location to another while holding this little box and sharing his story. With unwavering resolve, he presented his story at judicial proceedings, among lawmakers, and even in the corridors of Parliament. The ear had transformed from a missing physical part to a political weapon and a call to action for justice and retaliation. The audience was immediately captivated by the narrative. The cruelty shocked and infuriated people. Jenkins' ear served as the proof that gave the intangible struggle a tangible, human face, and he became a live representation of the British suffering at the hands of the Spanish. Newspapers disseminated the story widely, hardening public opinion and escalating anti-Spanish hostility. That small fragment of flesh, a severed ear, became the catalyst for the bizarre and violent War of Jenkins' Ear. The ensuing conflict was characterized by tumultuous naval engagements in the azure waters of the Caribbean, tragic moments punctuated by unexpected comedies, and political ploys that would determine the destiny of entire empires. What would you have done if you had been Jenkins? Try to keep the hurt hidden, put the insult behind you, and quietly move on, or cling tenaciously to the agonizing reminder, repeating your tale repeatedly to ensure no one missed it? Jenkins opted for the latter. His tale serves as a reminder that even the tiniest, most insignificant events can alter the path of history, and that the most intense struggles can be sparked by personal suffering. The day when Jenkins lost a portion of his ear was therefore not a typical day. Rather, it was the day that a personal tragedy served as the impetus for war. That small, gory object turned, become a potent representation of rage, pride in one's country, and the intricate dance of empire politics. Are you prepared to see how this spark in the shape of an ear sparked contentious discussions in the British Parliament? How did it result in maritime battles that were both chaotic and dramatic? And how did Jenkins' personal suffering find its way into the greater narrative of war and colonial rivalry? The ear is just the start of this amazing journey. Let's continue. Did you realize that Robert Jenkins was doing much more than just expressing a personal tragedy when he gave the British Parliament his unwanted ear? Jenkins unintentionally ended up holding one of the most strange and potent treasures in political history. Everyone in that magnificent hall was shocked and captivated by this, not wealth or jewelry, but a detached bit of his own body, beautifully wrapped in a little box. Imagine a big, elaborate room full of solemn, bearded men wearing formal wear and powdered wigs. These were the legislators and influential personalities who shaped the British Empire's destiny. Jenkins, a straightforward sea captain who had been beaten up by the rough life at sea, I was standing there as he opened the box to show the piece of his ear that had been removed. Many members of Parliament avoided looking at this gloomy relic because it was so weird and unpleasant. The atmosphere was unpleasant at first, with several people shifting in their chairs and talking behind their hands. All attention returned to the box and its contents. However, as Jenkins told his narrative with increasing fervor and flaming outrage, in addition to being a medical curiosity, the severed ear served as a tangible sign of Spanish violence, an insult to British honor, and a symbol of anger. Soon, even the most dry budget reports and the most important laws on the floor were eclipsed by the ear as the talk of Parliament. Jenkins's ear was worth more than many of the empire's investments put together. Some members joked, because it was so unbelievable. The picture of a guy demanding justice by holding up his own severed ear quickly went viral and became a powerful political instrument. Jenkins, holding the ear, did not omit anything. He vividly recalled the cold, premeditated savagery he experienced on those huge, wild seas. The moment the Spanish officer chopped off his ear, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal he experienced. His story was more than just a personal gripe. It was the expression of the rage and frustration of a whole country. Using Jenkins's account as a potent critique of Spain, British politicians took advantage of the situation. They said that the Spanish government was acting like vicious bullies who disregarded Britain's legitimate position in the New World and breaking international maritime law. The ear evolved into a rallying cry, a compelling and persuasive argument for escalating military action. You may be asking yourself, a fight over an ear? What could be more absurd? But for you, that's politics. Sometimes all a government needs to mobilize the populace and bring disparate groups together in favor of a war endeavor is the ideal justification, a distinct, indisputable reason. Jenkins's ear was exactly that, a flawless, real, and horrific justification. Every time Jenkins's ear was brought up, parliamentary sessions assumed an oddly dramatic tone. Several humorous tales recount how he once raised the box so dramatically that everyone in the room had to turn to look at the gory relic. Who could have thought a war would start over such a tiny piece of flesh? Several members allegedly cried in shock. Discussions about the peculiar conditions surrounding the ear, as well as international policy, ensued, praising Jenkins as the spark that ignited Britain's military comeback. Some MPs debated vehemently about the necessity to fortify the Royal Navy in order to stop such insults in the future. Others joked that Britain would win over Spain if they could gather a few more ears like Jenkins's. These meetings occasionally wavered between sober political discourse and humorous ridiculousness. At the heart of it all was the ear, a peculiar fusion of tragedy, symbolism, and dark comedy that captured the interest of the country. The ear, which represented a growing sense of national pride and the need for vengeance, became the center of British politics, regardless of the mood. The War of Jenkins's Ear began in 1739, when Jenkins's personal tragedy led to the formal declaration of war against Spain. Imagine that, a small piece of flesh cut off in a fit of rage, used as justification for ships to sail, guns to fire, and hordes of warriors to charge into combat for control of distant oceans and rich colonies. However, the actual conflict was neither heroic nor glorious. Confusion, poor leadership, and frequently disorderly skirmishes characterized it. Both tragic and humorous instances occurred, including friendly fire mishaps, misguided attacks, and humorous gaffes that would make contemporary audiences laugh at the unpredictability of battle in the 18th century. No longer was Robert Jenkins a mere sea commander. He had turned into the man whose amputated ear sparked one of the most bizarre wars in history. His strange little treasure had become a potent representation of honor, injustice, and the ferocious resolve of a country that would not tolerate insults. This tale serves as the ideal reminder that great generals and monarchs are not the only historical figures who have influenced history. The littlest things, like a man, an ear cut, or a painful experience, can occasionally tip the scales and cause significant change. Jenkins and his ear provide as evidence that there are actual individuals, bizarre tales, and unanticipated triggers hiding beneath every dispute. The scene was set for a fight that appeared as bizarre as its name, the War of Jenkins' Ear. Jenkins's ear became a potent symbol of injustice and war, and his graphic account reverberated through the British Parliament's hallowed halls. Following Britain's formal declaration of war against Spain in 1739, the two empires engaged in a protracted, intricate, and frequently chaotic struggle for supremacy in the Caribbean and beyond. The war was far from the peaceful, valiant conflicts you might anticipate from history books or Hollywood films. Despite the official proclamations and patriotic speeches, instead, the war was characterized by misunderstandings, uncertainty, and ridiculous, almost comical moments. This battle developed more like a twisted ball of yarn, full of knots, tangles, and unexpected twists, than it did like a great dance. Imagine this, with flags flying and cannons loaded. The Spanish and British fleets confronted one another across the wide ocean. However, the ships frequently fought only to stay afloat and maintain formation in choppy waters rather than launching well-planned maneuvers and accurate attacks. Sometimes sailors, bewildered by the confusion, unintentionally shot their own fellows or, in even stranger cases, pointed their cannons at passing seagulls, causing them to disperse in fear. The ships were not an easy place to live. In addition to enemy fire, sailors had to contend with the constant annoyances of the sea, such as persistently buzzing insects, scuttling rodents, and the overpowering stink of inadequate hygiene. There are many tales of sailors from both sides fighting over stale bread rations or the remaining barrels of foul-smelling rum rather than actual fights. And the claustrophobic, wet conditions made life miserable. A succession of accidents that produced both moments of humor and fatal results frequently interrupted naval operations. A British ship once experienced a rudder problem that left it circling in the water indefinitely, being chased in confusion by both friends and enemies. Cannons frequently failed to hit their targets at all, leaving sailors to wonder what they had just attacked as cannonballs splashed harmlessly into the sea. There were serious underlying stakes despite the turmoil and humor. Both empires aimed to seize control of vital ports, key waterways, and priceless colonies with abundant natural resources and potential for trade. Key coastal cities were the target of numerous landing attempts, but they were usually prevented by inclement weather, logistical issues, or strong opposition from well-prepared defenders. A great variety of attitudes among the soldiers and sailors was exposed by the human side of the battle. Fatigue, annoyance, and even boredom mixed with bravery and resolve. Men created sports, had wobbly shooting competitions, and lightened the mood with tall or amusing tales to pass the long hours at sea. During the difficulties, camaraderie grew, but so did rivalry and sporadic squabbling, sometimes between sailors of different ranks, and other times even between sailors from opposing sides who found common ground in the ridiculousness of their circumstances. Occupational dangers and accidental injuries were commonplace. Stories of men falling on wet decks, shooting themselves in the leg by accident, or having frightful shark encounters that caused fear and frantic scrambling were common. Even though they were frequently perilous, these occurrences contributed to the war's vibrant and brilliant tapestry and served as a reminder that real people, imperfect, vulnerable, and frequently humorous in their struggles, make up history. The War of Jenkins' Ear ultimately stretched on for years, draining the resources and energies of both Spain and Britain, yet yielding no obvious or enduring winner. Numerous subsequent historians referred to it as a pointless struggle that resulted in years of suffering and loss, despite being sparked by a small bit of flesh. In retrospect, the battle provides a startling window into the lives of those who participated in it, as well as a depressing lesson on the pointlessness of combat. The War of Jenkins' Ear tells the tale of how an apparently trivial incident, the loss of one ear, could turn into a momentous global crisis, and how, in the midst of the tragedy and drama, people managed to find comedy, resiliency, and humanity. Therefore, even though the ear was tiny, it had a huge impact, and the tale of this odd conflict is still among the most interesting and humorous parts of history. More than just an interesting and perhaps amusing historical anecdote, Robert Jenkins and his lost ear serve as a potent illustration of how seemingly insignificant private matters may have a significant impact on world affairs. At first, Jenkins was just a regular sailor, a man who navigated dangerous waters with his ship and crew, facing the challenges of a captain every day. But after a strange turn of events and a vicious act of violence, he became a symbol of indignation and a leader in the fight for justice for England. Jenkins' presentation of his amputated ear to the British Parliament marked a sea change for the empire as a whole. Not just for him, a simple, physical piece of flesh that bore the weight of a nation's humiliation and pride captured the attention of parliamentarians who were typically preoccupied with dull reports, economic arguments, and political scheming. It was a startling and unexpected sight to see a man in front of the nation's most influential parliamentarians, displaying his own mutilation as indisputable evidence of Spanish brutality. The idea that a tiny piece of a man's ear could spark such a bloody conflict between two of Europe's biggest empires was difficult to comprehend back then, and it is still difficult to grasp now. But it did ignite. With the official declaration of the War of Jenkins' Ear, a protracted and intricate struggle for dominance and influence in the Caribbean seas began. This long-running conflict was about more than just territory and trade routes. It also dealt with symbolism, or how one individual's narrative may arouse the rage and resolve of an entire country to oppose perceived injustice. Jenkins accepted his surprising role, treating the cut portion of his ear like a priceless gift. He kept it carefully wrapped in a tiny box. Jenkins was a living reminder of the cause he championed, bringing his tail and ear with him wherever he went, including to courts, political events, and public forums. He had evolved from a Marine captain to a representation of tenacity, fortitude, and the pursuit of justice. The conflict itself, meanwhile, developed with all the mayhem and uncertainty that one could anticipate from such an odd start. Naval conflicts were often chaotic, characterized by tactical errors, bewilderment, and tragic and unexpectedly humorous moments. In addition to their human adversaries, sailors and troops had to battle with rat infestations, persistent insects, severe weather, and the sea's ruthless force. Jenkins's tale serves as a reminder that history is frequently more about the little, oddball elements that suddenly shift the tide of history than it is about the big, overarching events. An apparently inconsequential fragment of a man's ear turned become a powerful symbol and the catalyst for a historic conflict. It serves as a reminder that the forces influencing history are fundamentally human, replete with suffering, obstinate will, and occasionally strange turns of events. In addition to his contemporaries' hearts and thoughts, Robert Jenkins made a lasting impression on history books. His story serves as evidence of the strength of will, the value of tenacity, and the ability of even the tiniest, most improbable events can alter the trajectory of entire nations. Above all, Jenkins's story demonstrates that history is about people vibrant, imperfect, and incredibly human, whose tales, occasionally odd and amusing. Indure, in addition to starting an odd war, Robert Jenkins's severed ear left a legacy full of insights and lessons that have reverberated throughout history. The War of Jenkins' Ear opened a novel chapter full of revelations about the power of personal stories and the frequently absurd nature of combat. Even though it did not result in a clear victory or glorious triumph for either Britain or Spain, both empires were exhausted after the war broke out, both in terms of personnel, money, and international standing. As bloody as they were chaotic, the conflict was characterized by naval battles. There were occasions when both participants and onlookers sighed at the tragedy or laughed at the ridiculousness due to a series of tactical blunders, unsuccessful amphibious landings, and unclear orders. Since then, a number of historians have referred to it as a notorious war, one that is notorious for its vast chaos and unpredictable nature in addition to its peculiar beginning. More significantly, the battle revealed the unpleasant reality that powerful nations occasionally use private affairs to further their larger political objectives. A man's lost ear, which started off as a very personal injury, was exaggerated into a potent symbol and rationale to obtain advantage in negotiations, colonial rivalry, and control over profitable trade routes. This story is a powerful reminder that history is intricately entwined with human emotions, personal suffering, and the stories we tell it is not just made up of dates, figures, and maps. This story also emphasizes an amusing yet bitter aspect of human nature, our propensity to occasionally accept strange or surprising justifications for engaging in violence. Who would have thought that thousands of people would take up guns and put their lives in danger over a small piece of flesh? However, history is full with unexpected turns, paradoxes, and moments that make us laugh and consider the more profound implications of pride and power. The conflict also captures the geopolitical reality of the 18th century, when European empires fought for control of provinces far from their home countries and were prepared to use all available means, including force and diplomacy, to protect their interests. It emphasizes the conflict between the relatively minor, occasionally ridiculous events that lead to the big, overarching decisions made by kings and ministers. Robert Jenkins and his severed ear have become timeless symbols that have been ingrained in the communal memory of succeeding generations. Despite the mayhem and ultimate impasse, they are a tribute to how a minor personal incident can have a profound effect that extends well beyond its site and symbolizes the remarkable strength that can emerge from the most seemingly vulnerable areas. The Jenkins' Ear War is ultimately remembered as a terrible and strangely funny historical event that serves as a warning about the interactions between people, power, and the unpredictability of events. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the tiniest things, a word, a gesture, or an ear, have the capacity to alter the course of history. With its eternal lessons on pride, politics, and the human condition, this odd and intriguing tale never fails to enthrall historians and inquisitive minds. The world changed in ways no one could have predicted due to a small piece of the body, leaving behind a legacy that is both fascinating and remarkable. In the 18th century, the Caribbean Sea was much more than just boundless expanses of golden-hued, white sand beaches. Every European empire longed for the huge pie of wealth and opportunity that lay under those glistening blue seas. Empires were willing to risk all to secure even a small portion of this enormous, warm sea, and they would fight for it with every weapon and strategy they had. What made the Caribbean so crucial? As it served as the ideal entryway for the return of wealth and products from the Americas to Europe. These rivers carried tobacco, sugar, exotic hardwoods, gold and silver mined in the New World, spices from the East Indies, and a host of other luxury goods. Being in charge of the Caribbean meant having a piece of what was, in many respects, the richest pie of the time, a huge and extraordinarily profitable trading network. Imagine a world without enormous warehouses, trucks, or airplanes as the lifelines that connected continents. Sailing ships were the commercial engines. Along with cargo, each cargo ship carried the hopes and fortunes of merchants, crews, and nations. Disasters like delays, losses, or capture have tremendous impact on governments and economies alike. On these waters, the struggle for dominance and riches was intense and merciless. Survival was not only a matter of life or death, but also of influence and power. Spain, who proudly ruled a huge empire that stretched from South America to the Caribbean islands, was in the center of this disputed sea. At important strategic locations, like San Juan in Puerto Rico and Havana in Cuba, Spain erected strong forts and docks. These ports were heavily defended bastions designed to keep rival nations, privateers, and pirates away from the flow of ships carrying riches. Spain jealously defended its lands and demanded complete control over trade routes because it saw the Caribbean as an unassailable fortress. However, Spain's hegemony was continuously contested. As emerging maritime powers, England and France refused to watch helplessly as their rivals accumulated wealth and gained control over these vital waters. Both countries invested heavily in bolstering their navy, deploying warships to patrol and challenge Spanish authority. However, their activities were not restricted to government fleets. Piracy, privateering, and smuggling also flourished as strategies to weaken and disturb Spain's hold. In the Caribbean, trade was a complicated and frequently hazardous endeavor that involved more than just the movement of products. Privateers pursued treasure ships. Warships engaged in combat with merchant vessels. And sailors were constantly in danger from both government enforcement and criminal activity. Precious goods were packed into crammed cargo holds. And the sounds of merchants, sailor, and the occasional gunshot filled the busy ports. A combination of possibility, risk, and ongoing tension permeated the electrifying environment. In this place, danger and fortune were close companions. Errors could cost lives, money, and even the fate of entire empires because the waters were cruel. Every empire understood that losing land here may result in a catastrophic decline, since control of the Caribbean meant power, including political, military, and economic clout. Minor incidents could turn into significant clashes in this unstable environment. Robert Jenkins's ear being severed was not merely a singular instance of cruelty. Rather, it became a symbol, a flare that ignited tensions that had been simmering for decades. The War of Jenkins' Ear, which reflected the intense rivalry and high stakes of this golden sea, was fought under the guise of what might have been a small skirmish. Therefore, keep in mind that this is more than just a narrative of personal tragedy. As you follow Jenkins and his notorious ear, it is a tale steeped in the economic and strategic realities of the Caribbean in the 18th century. When empires fought for survival, pride, and wealth in a region where the sea served as a fight for power as well as a means of achieving wealth, amateurs had no place in the Caribbean. Some of the most powerful empires of the 18th century fought each other in this high-stakes arena, not only over trade, but also over survival, pride, and domination. more than just opposing nations. England, Spain, France, and others were expert fighters playing a never-ending power game across these azure waters. Think of the Caribbean as a huge chessboard, with each kingdom carefully planning each move and using shrewd strategies, deceit, and physical force in a never-ending struggle to outmaneuver its rivals. The dominant giant in this huge maritime theater was, of course, Spain. With centuries of colonial history under its belt, Spain dominated a vast stream of precious goods, including gold and silver, coming from the Americas. Havana in Cuba and San Juan in Puerto Rico are two of the most impressive examples of the Spanish Empire's meticulously built network of military installations, forts, and key port cities. In addition to safeguarding priceless treasure fleets, these fortifications were built as staging grounds for imposing Spanish authority and upholding territorial claims. Any foreign ship that dared to challenge Spanish authority feared harsh punishment because of Spain's firm and unyielding hold over the Caribbean. However, there were always challenges to Spanish control. As emerging maritime nations with their own aspirations for empire, England and France refused to stay on the sidelines. By sending warships and privateers to the Caribbean to impede Spanish trade and enforce their own claims, both countries significantly expanded their naval presence there. The competition to control Caribbean trade was unrelenting. It was an ongoing battle in which all strategies were acceptable, ranging from open violence and plunder to political scheming and covert espionage. England created a special fusion of military might and clandestine operations in an effort to increase the size of its colonies and commercial empire. Fast, agile ships built to outrun and outgun the Spanish treasure galleons were added to British fleets. In order to get commodities past Spanish patrols, England also used networks of cunning smugglers and disguised merchant vessels. By using both force and guile, England was able to undermine Spanish power without always starting a full-scale war. Meanwhile, France kept its own naval forces and bases in the area, keeping a close eye out for chances to take advantage of Spain's vulnerabilities. France was cautious, despite its desire to increase its might, because it knew that a direct conflict with Spain may deplete its resources and interfere with its interests abroad. As a result, French policy frequently struck a compromise between diplomacy and violence in order to achieve goals without inciting full-scale conflict. Even small disputes or occurrences have the potential to turn into bigger wars in this intricate and dynamic geopolitical environment. Tensions swiftly escalated due to conflicts over trade or clashes at sea. The Ear incident involving Robert Jenkins assumed a disproportionately significant significance in this combustible environment. What may have been a personal injury turned into the ideal justification for England to mobilize the populace and formally declare war. The mood wasn't always gloomy. The human side of this great power competition is vividly depicted in humorous anecdotes from the time period. Occasionally, the biting wit of verbal sparring between English and Spanish officials, or laughter over ridiculous errors, would break up strategic discussions between politicians and generals. The Caribbean would surely have the unpleasant distinction of being the region with the most notoriety. According to some jokes, if the fate of the globe were determined solely by lost ears, for these big players, the Caribbean genuinely turned into a grand playground where military power was matched by strategic insight, shrewd diplomacy, and a willingness to take advantage of any chance. The tale of Jenkins and his notorious era, bizarre representation of a war that combined the tragic and the ridiculous, the personal and the political, was formed in this sphere of unending intrigue and strife. As you delve further into this extraordinary chapter, keep in mind that every great empire and epic conflict conceals a network of intricate human endeavors, aspirations, and surprising tales, the kind that turn history from a mere chronicle of events into a tapestry of striking, Enduring tales. Pirates were the unwanted troublemakers who added turmoil and unpredictability to every plan. If the Caribbean Sea was the big stage where powerful empires fought for dominance and wealth, these men exemplified the wild spirit and ferocious independence that made the Caribbean notorious. They were not merely ordinary thieves, but were legendary individuals who established their own lawless kingdoms on the sea. Imagine a motley crew of men with intimidating names like Calico Jack, Henry Morgan, or Blackbeard. They lived outside the legal boundaries of any country, were only subject to their own moral standards, and were experts at locating and stealing the luxuriously loaded ships that sailed the Caribbean. These pirates were charming outlaws who transformed the sea into a hazardous, unpredictable, and exciting environment full of intrigue and adventure. They were also frightening and sometimes romantic characters. Pirates served as the 18th century's special sabotage squad in many respects. They struck unexpectedly and craftily, taking advantage of favorable conditions. Secret coves, or merchant sailors' inexperience to seize priceless loot. Before vanishing into the wide blue, their swift strikes left destruction in their path. Don't assume, though, that they were always prosperous. Numerous attempts failed, some of which were so ridiculous that years later the pirates themselves could laugh about them. For instance, there are stories of pirates attempting to board opposing ships only to have their plans thwarted by their own incompetence, slipping and falling into the sea. There are tales of ferocious altercations that broke out over barrels of rum, transforming planned attacks into inebriated skirmishes that destroyed the raid by sending troops plummeting overboard. The erratic nature of life on the Caribbean seas was typified by these hilariously chaotic situations. Pirates made life at sea much more exciting and perilous. Even though they were also annoyances and threats to imperial powers, merchant or naval ship sailors had to be constantly on the lookout for enemy warships, as well as unexpected visits by pirate crews seeking a quick booty. Piracy was a constant threat, which made life at sea even more exciting and tense. The big powers had to change because pirates were a continual menace. To safeguard important commercial lanes and settlements, forts were constructed, ports were fortified, and ships were reinforced. The Caribbean's imperial rivalry, which pitted states against one another as well as the lawless groups that flourished there, became inextricably linked to the war against piracy. Some pirates went beyond being outlaws to become legendary figures. Their audacious deeds immortalized in tales that have captured people's attention for generations. Despite being criminals by law, these men contributed to the development of the Caribbean's cultural identity by presenting the sea in a variety of ways, including as a site of opportunity, peril, and countless tales. As you can see, the Caribbean served as a playground for criminals and adventurers during the 18th century, in addition to being a battleground for empires. There, survival depended as much on guile and good fortune as it did on weaponry, and the distinction between hero and villain was frequently hazy. The bizarre and unforgettable tale of Robert Jenkins and his severed ear occurred against this turbulent and exciting backdrop, which was full of strong nations, crafty pirates, and unending intrigue. It stands out as a symbol of the turbulent times and the bizarre turns that history can take. The romantic adventure depicted in paintings or sang about in sea shanties was rarely the reality of life aboard the enormous sailing ships of the Caribbean in the 18th century. It was a daily grind of adversity, peril, and perseverance for sailors like Robert Jenkins and his crew. Beneath the epic stories of exploration and naval conflicts was a world of claustrophobic living conditions, relentless suffering, and the ever-present danger of illness and death. Imagine the interior of these wooden ships, slender, poorly lighted holds crammed with supplies, crates, and barrels. The smell of mold, rotten food, moist wood, and the scuffing feet of rats that lived on the ship filled the air. This was a harsh, nearly oppressive atmosphere that stuck to every man's skin and clothing instead of the cool sea air that most people envision. Another source of suffering for the sailors was their nutrition. Hard tack, a dry, stale biscuit, salted meat that occasionally had a hint of rot, and dried beans, which may swell in the stomach but offered little food, were among the basic, monotonous, and frequently hardly edible meals. A rare luxury was fresh produce, which was essential for avoiding illnesses like scurvy. Scurvy was a cruel reminder of the limitations of life at sea, causing many sailors to experience body weakness and bleeding gums. The enemy was always there, disease, because to the unhygienic circumstances, infections from minor wounds could become fatal. Even the toughest soldiers suffered from seasickness, which left them pallid and weak for days. These issues were made worse by the lack of fresh water, which made sailors ration their little supplies. There was little hygiene. In the absence of adequate facilities, sailors had to rely on bucket washes and the open sea, which led to discomfort and disease. Nevertheless, sailors managed to maintain their spirits in the face of these unrelenting adversities. Simple games, comedy, and camaraderie kept morale high. Pranks were widespread. Stories abound about sailors posing as ghosts to frighten their fellows, or holding amusing storytelling competitions that made the ship's deck roar with laughter, despite the raging storms outside. These humorous moments were essential, because they provided fleeting reprieves from the terrible reality below deck. There was also a lot of conflict among the team. Men who lived in cramped quarters, far from their homes and families, frequently became agitated and combative. The simplest infractions could lead to fights. Even something as insignificant as one chair could start a serious altercation that calls for the captain's involvement. The captain's responsibilities went beyond navigation and combat to include serving as a referee, mediator, and occasionally a psychotherapist. Discipline was rigorous but essential. As captain, Robert Jenkins would have had to handle his crew's internal conflicts in addition to the sea's inherent hazards. He must have confronted the difficulty of preserving order and morale in the face of tiredness and despair. Or he may have chuckled through tears at the absurdity of certain occurrences. The sea itself posed constant threats. Unexpected storms could threaten to capsize the ship by tearing at the rigging and sails. Navigation was deadly at risk from hidden reefs. Of course, there was always the risk of pirate raids or naval conflicts. In order to protect the ship and its valuable cargo, while clinging to the brittle ties of friendship that bound them together, sailors had to be prepared to risk their lives at any time. Jenkins and his crew went through a wide range of emotions during this time: delight in times of laughter and camaraderie, sorrow at the circumstances, dread in the face of peril, and hope for safe passage. In addition to work and survival, their lives were filled with human tales of tenacity, devotion, and the small joys that kept them going amidst the untamed Caribbean waters. Therefore, keep in mind the tears, laughter, and sweat that went into Jenkins's bizarre and well-known tale of the ear that started a war. Remember the remarkable men who braved those perilous seas, whose day-to-day hardships influenced this peculiar and intriguing period of history. Nothing was ever really trivial in the tumultuous and chaotic world of the Caribbean waters in the 18th century. Or at least, nothing remained trivial once the right people started talking about it. Tension was high in the waters, ships collided, crews were detained, and small-scale mishaps had a tendency to turn into major emergencies. The episode with Robert Jenkins' severed ear stood out among these apparently insignificant sparks because it started a fire that had far-reaching effects. The Caribbean relationship between England and Spain was already at an all-time low before, to Jenkins' regrettable injury. Spanish inspections, Zeitsuches, and charges of smuggling or breaking Spanish laws were frequent threats to English trade ships. English authorities and traders were resentful of these activities, which led to a simmering discontent that increased the frequency and volume of calls for retaliation to defend military action to their own citizens and allies. However, political leaders required a specific, indisputable justificazione, perfect excuse. As strange as it seems, Jenkins's case was the ideal present. Not only was it a cruel act of violence when a Spanish officer severed a portion of an English captain's ear during one of these inspections, but it also became a physical representation of Spanish contempt and anger. However, Jenkins' decision to keep the amputated ear was what really made his story memorable. Rather, he meticulously preserved it and carried it with him everywhere as unquestionable proof. When a missing body part was packaged in a tiny box and presented to the nation's highest authorities, nobody could ignore it. This tragedy became a potent symbol of injustice. In addition to being a devastating personal harm, Jenkins' ear became a tool used by English politicians and military leaders to mobilize armies, garner popular support, and get ready for war. It was a glaring example of how, when handled well, minor incidents can have a huge impact on politics and history. But there was a much more nuanced reality hidden beneath this theatrical emblem. In an area already rife with conflicts, arrests, altercations, and even instances of mutual looting, Jenkins's episode was only the tip of the iceberg. Petty disagreements and skirmishes were common in the Caribbean during that time, and many of them were either poorly documented or ignored diplomatically. Spanish and English ships regularly came into contact with one another, resulting in little altercations that gradually damaged confidence and increased hostilities. Thus, using Jenkins' ear as a justification for war demonstrated both the impetuous and opportunistic nature of political and military decision-making, as well as the precarious state of international relations at the moment. The incident offered a convenient and very sentimental focal point for bringing political will and popular opinion together. More generally, the tale of Jenkins's ear serves as a reminder of an important historical lesson. Large-scale conflicts are not always the catalyst for war. Rather, they frequently start with minor incidents, mishaps, or skirmishes that don't seem connected. Such events can become catalysts for significant change and shift the course of history if they are blown up at the correct time and place by the media, lawmakers, and public opinion. Jenkins' personal sorrow turned into a major historical turning point because of the Caribbean seas. With all their complicated connections, complicated battles, and constant peril, a violent act committed against a lone man served as the impetus for an odd but significant conflict that would reverberate for generations. It becomes evident as we go more into this intriguing era that history is not just about the ambitious plans of kings and empires, but also about the erratic power of little events. The small, hideous, but remarkably potent ear of Jenkins serves as a metaphor for how individual pain can become intertwined with the destiny of entire nations. Images of infamous pirates outlaws who not only terrified the seas, but also rose to legendary status, always come to mind when people think of the Caribbean in the 18th century. These were not just ordinary bandits, they were vibrant, notorious, and even shockingly funny individuals whose lives influenced the Caribbean's volatile landscape. Edward Teach, popularly known as Blackbeard, was at the very top of this rogues gallery, although Blackbeard's name alone evokes feelings of mystery and horror. His terrifying reputation extended well beyond his moniker. He was an infamous pirate captain who terrified both Empire ships and seamen. During attacks, Blackbeard would weave small lit candles and slow-burning fuses into his thick black beard, producing a menacing silhouette surrounded by flickering flames and smoke. This was his distinctive style that made him especially memorable. He gained an almost otherworldly air from this flaming display, becoming a living representation of terror amid the gloomy nights of the ocean. In addition to his reputation for cruelty, Blackbeard was also known for his cunning. He frequently used intimidation to force ships to surrender without a battle, because he knew when to attack strongly and when to bargain. His flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a representation of pirate might in and of itself. It was intimidating and heavily armed, and it loomed on the horizon like a ghost ship. Henry Morgan, another prominent person in the history of piracy in the Caribbean, was not far behind Blackbeard in notoriety. Morgan was a brilliant tactician and commander. In contrast to the chaotic and frequently disorganized stereotype of pirates, he organized strikes with military accuracy and launched audacious raids on affluent Spanish ports. Because of his extraordinary exploits, Morgan was able to rise above his criminal reputation and eventually become the lieutenant governor of Jamaica. A stunning transition from pirate to official position. However, these pirates' lives were anything from glorious or triumphant. There are many exciting moments interspersed with irony and humor in their stories. For example, there is a well-known story about a pirate captain who, while trying to board an opposing ship, slipped and fell into the sea. To the confusion of the enemy, his crew halted their attack to save him. Carefully thought-out raids were frequently derailed by storms, which dispersed men and destroyed ships. Rats, the constant annoyance on board, might occasionally wreak mayhem by scuttling through cargo and ropes and diverting sailors at crucial times. Because pirate life was so risky, it required audacity, ingenuity, and unwavering bravery. Pirates were constantly in danger from defection within their own ranks, as well as from imperial navies. Loot-related arguments could turn violent, weakening crews and occasionally resulting in self-destruction. The organized chaos that characterized the Caribbean seas was largely the result of these pirates. Even powerful empires found it challenging to keep control due to their erratic attacks. Fury and cleverness. In a never-ending game of cat and mouse, the existence of pirates compelled navies to adjust, fortifications to be constructed, and alliances to be formed. Survival in this environment required strength, cunning, and good fortune, and the rule of law was, at best, shaky. Stories like the one about Robert Jenkins and his unusual ear stood out in this world of peril and intrigue. Jenkins's narrative became a noteworthy thread sewn into the great fabric of Caribbean history among the tumultuous sea of pirates and civilization. The romanticized stories and Hollywood blockbusters that exalt valiant heroes and never-ending adventure are very different from pirate life. In actuality, it was a never-ending battle against dangers, adversity, and the capricious mayhem of the sea, a life full of experiences that were both exciting and dangerous, and occasionally so ridiculous that they became hilariously memorable. There were no vacations, no quiet havens, and no homes for pirates to return to. The huge, constantly shifting water was their only company. Their ships, which were frequently cramped and small, smelled of sweat, sea salt, and the distinct smell of uninvited guests like rats, snakes, and swarms of insects that bit. Life on board was a never-ending struggle to keep things in order in a small, uncomfortable, and frequently filthy space. On these ships, chaos was a frequent companion. Men from a variety of backgrounds made up crews, which were put together out of necessity and circumstance. Disputes over personal space, The distribution of watch duty, or the last morsel of food, were among the minor issues that often led to arguments. These disputes occasionally turned into cutlass or pistol-wielding duels, but other times they devolved into grudging jokes and practical jokes that reduced hostility and promoted unity. Beyond these interpersonal conflicts, however, were the constant dangers posed by nature. In addition to imperial navies and opposing ships, pirates had to contend with storms that could throw their ships like toys. Without notice, the sea may become wild, with gusts tearing sails apart, waves smashing over decks, and swirling winds that could topple even the most resilient vessels. These sequences, which looked lifted from out-of-live-action adventure movies, showed sailors clinging desperately to ropes and rigging as their lives hung on the precipice. Pirates were more than just wild bandits without a sense of order. Despite what the general public believes, they followed a series of unwritten laws that were intended to keep the crew fair and disciplined. The equitable distribution of booty was one of the most crucial tenets. All men, from captain to new recruit, were entitled to a portion. However, there were harsh penalties, such as marooning or even death, for those found concealing or stealing loot. These norms made sure that allegiance and trust could be maintained, at least shakily, between such different factions, and helped keep the peace in the midst of the mayhem. Frequent conflicts with the strong imperial navies of France, Spain, and England were another aspect of pirate life. These conflicts were frequently tumultuous affairs, with valiant and skillful performances interspersed with amusing accidents. Cannonballs would occasionally crash harmlessly into the water or, worse, hit friendly ships after cannons missed their objectives by large margins. Ships frequently collided, resulting in desperate attempts to untangle rigging or even repel boarding parties amidst the debris. Occasionally, friendly fire occurrences led to confusion and pushed both Navy soldiers and pirates to run in unexpected directions. Being a pirate meant more than just being strong and brave. Adaptability and cunning were crucial. In order to outsmart their pursuers, pirates skillfully employed disguises, topographical knowledge, and meteorological conditions in order to evade capture or obtain intelligence. Some even participated in covert collusion with dishonest officials or local rulers, exchanging favors or gold. Every day at sea served as a lesson in survival, where intelligence and fast thinking were occasionally more important than raw firepower. This life as an outlaw produced a universe that was both exciting and terrifying. In addition to times of excitement, resourcefulness, and companionship, pirates' existence were fraught with peril and uncertainty. These men, who were motivated by need, avarice, or the yearning for independence, added to the rich and varied fabric of Caribbean history and prepared the way for the peculiar and unforgettable incidents involving Robert Jenkins and his notorious ear. Pirates in the Caribbean were an inevitable problem for the major European powers of the 18th century because they were undesirable, dangerous, and unpredictable. However, these outlaws could never be totally eliminated, despite unrelenting efforts. Furthermore, pirates were occasionally viewed as both foes and vital, secret weapons in a convoluted and frequently murky geopolitical game. Depending on the changing tides of politics and conflict, pirates were seen by Spain as merely irresponsible robbers who threatened the stability of important commerce routes and Spanish colonies. In order to prevent and apprehend pirates, Spanish authorities maintained strong fleets, strongly fortified ports such as Havana and Cartagena, and built coastal forts. To put an end to these sea raiders, they conducted regular patrols and military missions. Despite these attempts, the mission was all but impossible due to the crafty and evasive character of pirates. Spanish rule was, at best, shaky, due to the Caribbean's breadth and the pirates' intimate knowledge of secret passageways and hidden coves. The strategy used by England was more subtle and occasionally opportunistic, when it served their political objectives. The English crown and colonial governors occasionally secretly encouraged, controlled, or at least tolerated pirate activities, rather than seeing all pirates as pure foes. By attacking Spanish ships, pirates turned become instruments of proxy war, undermining Spain's economic might without resorting to direct conflict. This shadow politics, which took place in the dark world of secret alliances, covert instructions, and strategic tolerance, was mainly unsaid. While carefully balancing legality and pragmatism, English officials frequently ignored pirate operations or offered safe havens in English possessions. The relationship between France and pirates was very complex. Pirates were occasionally used as indirect conflict agents by French colonial authorities to thwart Spanish and English objectives. However, French pirates also occasionally operated on their own, disturbing local stability or assaulting French commerce ships, which caused issues even for their own government. French policy toward piracy was a delicate dance between exploitation and control because of this two-edged interaction. The boundaries between friend and foe, justice and lawlessness, and authority and revolt were frequently hazy in the Caribbean due to this complex web of alliances and enmities. Pirates could be fiercely pursued enemies one day and vital allies the next. When political tides changed, naval forces dispatched to quell piracy occasionally had to save pirate crews they had previously targeted. Pirates frequently switched allegiances in search of greater opportunities, prizes, or safety, resulting in spectacular betrayals. An already unstable area became much more complex as a result of these ups and downs. The empires had to continually reevaluate their tactics, determining whether to make uncomfortable truces, when to co-opt pirates, and when to completely annihilate them. Because of this dynamic environment, naval warfare and Caribbean life were significantly more complex and unpredictable than traditional histories typically portray. The tale of Robert Jenkins and his amputated ear becomes greater relevance in the context of shrewdness, shifting allegiances, and ongoing power conflicts, a vivid representation of the intricate and vibrant chess game being played on the Caribbean seas. What can seem like a personal tragedy is actually the tip of a much larger iceberg. Jenkins's tale illustrates how minor episodes and individual lives can become entangled with overarching imperial goals, covert plans, and the erratic tides of history. It serves as a reminder that nothing was ever black and white in the murky world of colonial power in the 18th century. Pirates served as allies, adversaries, tools, and symbols. Grand fights in the Caribbean during the 18th century are sometimes pictured as scenes from a well-produced Hollywood epic, complete with faultless execution, exact tactics, and ideal formations. We see commanders giving orders that change the course of history, enormous fleets moving in sync, and cannonballs launched with lethal accuracy. However, the actual situation was much messier a tornado of confusion, mayhem, and moments that might make even the most resilient sailors crazy, while bystanders could find it difficult to contain their amusement at the ridiculousness of it all. Consider the accuracy of cannon fire. For example, the powerful cannons that characterized naval might were not necessarily the exact tools one may think of. The training and technology available at the time were far from ideal. Numerous cannonballs completely missed their targets, bouncing against the hulls with a dull thud, or falling harmlessly into the sea. Grateful for such lucky misses, enemy sailors frequently sighed in relief, or silently laughed at their good fortune. And the turmoil of combat only exacerbated the situation. Gunners occasionally fired hurriedly without clear sightlines during intense action, thereby destroying their own ships or those of their allies. Battles became chaotic clashes as a result of these friendly fire episodes, which added levels of uncertainty and fear. Hollywood's portrayal of chases at sea as fast-paced and exciting was frequently painfully slow. Imagine a navy floating aimlessly in the seas, as following ships made a valiant attempt to catch up, hampered by a broken rudder or entangled in fishing nets. To ease the tense mood, the crew would joke and tease one another while hurriedly trying to fix damage. These slow-motion pursuits were more about perseverance, forbearance, and the will to live than they were about speed. Battles were not usually fought against the enemy fleet on board the ships. Internal disputes among the crew were common and occasionally just as intense as those among rival navies. Conflicts may arise over contested navigational choices, sought sleeping locations, or limited food supplies. Occasionally, these arguments turned into full-fledged fights, necessitating the intervention of captains as peacemakers. The turmoil of combat frequently spilled over into bloody battles on the ship's decks, where the conflict was between friends trying to survive in close quarters under tremendous pressure rather than with outside enemies. The erratic Caribbean weather, a subtle but powerful foe, added even another layer of chaos. Unexpected storms would arrive and unleash enormous waves that threw ships around like toys on a raging sea. As they struggled to stay afloat in the merciless ocean, sailors grabbed frantically to the rigging and ropes. These storms have the potential to destroy delicate battleships, harm vital equipment, and compel commanders to abandon meticulously planned strategies, or to flee completely. All on board were reminded that the sea was both a battlefield and a cruel mistress by the wrath of nature, which posed an equal threat to any enemy ship. Nevertheless, amidst this mayhem and peril, sailors discovered moments of happiness and companionship that kept them going on protracted. Challenging journeys, they raised morale through vibrant storytelling sessions that reverberated throughout the night. Jokes and sea shanties sung beneath the stars. On the ship's deck, acrobatics and bold strength and balance feats were displayed, providing both entertainment and much-needed morale boosts. In the face of constant adversity, these shared moments of humor and talent aided in creating ties of camaraderie and fortitude. In naval combat, humorous mishaps were unavoidable. There are several accounts of sailors becoming lost in the maze-like depths of shipholds, which led to brief pauses in combat while desperate searches were conducted. Sometimes, when enemy ships were closing in, guns stuck at the worst possible circumstances, necessitating last-ditch improvisations and occasionally valiant attempts to clean the weapon before catastrophe struck. These incidents gave the often somber business of war a personal, frequently humorous touch, while serving as a reminder to all parties concerned that the bizarre and unforeseen were always present, especially during times of strife. Despite the ostensibly absurd reason for the war, Jenkins's ear led both Britain and Spain into a string of draining, chaotic, and unexpected naval battles. Far from the neat parades of force and accuracy that are frequently envisioned, these encounters reflected the actual complexity and chaos of Caribbean naval combat during that time. They depicted a world where chaos was the norm, human error and luck were major factors, and bravery frequently coexisted with foolishness. The human stories of bravery, foolishness, perseverance, and comedy are brilliantly brought to life against this stormy backdrop. They depict not only conflict but also life on the tumultuous Caribbean waters, a life characterized by peril, unpredictability, and an unwavering spirit that resisted giving up even in the face of anarchy. the terrible reality of life on board wooden ships and maritime skirmishes are only a small part of pirate lore. These stories have evolved over ages into legendary and cultural symbols that are intricately interwoven with both world history and Caribbean identity. A clear picture of the pirate world, one full of peril, freedom, and romance, is immediately conjured up by the mere sight of pirates wearing tricorn hats, headscarves flapping in the wind, wielding big cutlasses, or having vibrant parrots perched on their shoulders. Pirates hold a unique role in the communal memory of the Caribbean. Songs that have been passed down through the decades, stories that are told around fires, and the oral histories of islanders whose ancestors saw or experienced the pirate era all serve to immortalize them. Many pirates are remembered as adventurous people who lived on the edge, accepting risk and seeking independence in a world constrained by severe rules and tyrannical forces, far from being only vicious criminals. According to this interpretation, pirates represent défiance, resistance, and the human spirit's unwavering pursuit of freedom. They were passionate and had a sophisticated code of conduct that guided their lives while living outside of the existing legal system and frequently disobeying kings and empires. Pirates have had a significant impact on popular culture all around the world, and their effect extends well beyond history books and folklore. From novels, video games, and costume festivals to daring Hollywood blockbusters like Pirates of the Caribbean, pirate imagery combines myth and historical reality to produce a timeless and alluring figure. Because of this cultural phenomenon, pirates have become timeless images that enthrall people of all ages and continents as representations of risk, adventure, and rebellion. Their tales add color, vitality, and charm to Caribbean stories, beckoning readers to delve into a world of mystery, chaos, and adventure. The cultural heritage of pirates endures despite the harsh and unromantic facts of history. It has influenced how the world perceives that tumultuous time as a dynamic, human tale full of freedom, adventure, morale, uncertainty, and social boundaries, rather than as a dry series of colonial conquests and conflicts. The lives, hardships, and aspirations of actual people who defied authority and dared to live differently, are woven into the fabric of history. And pirates help us comprehend this. The tale of Robert Jenkins and his peculiarly severed ear sticks out as a singular and moving remark in this vibrant display of Caribbean history. His story serves as a reminder that history is not limited to massive military wars and empires. It is also about people whose lives and tales profoundly influence the course of events, such as outlaws, seafarers, and unsung heroes. Jenkins's ear serves as a metaphor that connects the long-lasting, intensely personal experiences, the chaotic world of outlaws, and the vast story of imperial power. The heritage of Caribbean pirates ultimately serves as evidence of the intricate relationship that exists between identity, culture, power, and rebellion, themes as pertinent today as they were 3 centuries ago, such as freedom, justice, and the human desire to shape one's own destiny, are all explored in their legends, which still inspire and challenge us. History frequently takes unexpected turns. The simplest, most intimate moments can occasionally give rise to the most significant and far-reaching events. One such instance is the tale of Robert Jenkins and his peculiar ear. A very personal wound that, in spite of all the chances, developed into a potent symbol that pulled an entire empire into a drawn-out and expensive war. This is the story of how a single act of violence became into a symbol of injustice and the focal point of a country's rage. It all started when Jenkins, a regular English sea captain, ventured to show the British Parliament a portion of his own ear that had been removed. The response was electrifying and instantaneous. The ear was living proof of Spanish brutality and aggression, a tangible reminder of the humiliations Britain endured at the hands of a rival power. It was no longer only the story of a lowly sailor. Overnight, Jenkins was changed from a victim of his circumstances to a representation of the nation's indignation and defiance. Picture what might happen in the magnificent parliamentary hall as Jenkins carefully unveiled the tiny, hideous relic that had drastically changed his life in front of the country's most influential senators. The atmosphere grew more tense. This small, severed ear fascinated and upset politicians accustomed to discussing budgets and policy. Others felt their emotions rise, a mix of pity for Jenkins and rage at Spain, while others shuddered uncontrollably at the sight. For a lot of people, this piece of flesh became a legitimate cause, a motivation to stand up and defend justice, honor, and sovereignty. This occurrence highlights an amazing fact. Even something as seemingly little as a disgusting event can have significant symbolic meaning. Sometimes tiny stones cause enormous ripples in the great currents of history. With that ear in his grasp, Jenkins transformed from a man suffering from a severe injury to the catalyst for one of the most bizarre battles in history. The tale swiftly outgrew its intimate beginnings and became a national symbol of patriotism and resistance. It brought people together in a common rage and resolve that cut beyond political and class boundaries. The ear was transformed from a disfigured bodily part to a fiery torch that fueled the fires of pride in the country and the determination to resist what was seen as oppression. Through public debate, speeches, and pamphlets, Jenkins's ear sparked passions and rallied support for war. It was used to support military retribution and as evidence of Spain's ruthless disrespect for British liberties. This symbol was grabbed by the political elites, who used it to unite the military, the people, and Parliament in support of a shared goal. Jenkins's individual suffering was turned into a story of injustice and rebellion that was shared by everybody. As a result, the tale of the ear emerged from the claustrophobic shipholds and briny Caribbean waves to become an integral part of British history. It personified ideas of honor, rights, and the pursuit of victory that struck a profound chord in the collective consciousness of the British people. Beyond its gory physical reality, Jenkins's ear came to represent the struggle against oppression and the protection of sovereignty. Much may be learned about the historical significance of symbolism and storytelling from this transition from a personal sorrow to a national emblem. It serves as a reminder that human experiences tales that stir people's emotions, inspire nation, and alter the path of history at the heart of every political movement and conflict. Jenkins' ear serves as a reminder of how individual bravery and hardship may spur group action and leave a lasting impression on history. The British audience was deeply moved by Jenkins's horrifying tale and the picture of his amputated ear as it circulated outside of Parliament. What started out as a very painful and intimate event became a powerful representation of Spanish injustice and brutality, as well as the pressing need for Britain to stand up and protect its dignity and sense of national pride. Even though the 18th century press was much less sophisticated and pervasive than contemporary media, word of mouth, printed pamphlets, and broadsheets were enough to make Jenkins's ear one of the most talked about issues in Britain. The tale was told and repeated in crowded streets, smoke-filled bars, and boisterous town meetings. People demanded to hear every detail, including the brutality Jenkins endured, the Spanish officer's bluster, and Jenkins's unwavering will. Discussions ranged from passionate arguments over what England should do in reaction to Spain's approach to outrage. Public outrage was stoked by newspapers and pamphleteers that did not think twice about exaggerating the story and creating vivid, emotionally charged narratives. They portrayed Jenkins as the personification of British hardship and dignity, and Spain as the ruthless oppressor. A lighter, satirical tone was adopted by other periodicals, which published cartoons and caricatures that hilariously portrayed the incident while deriding the Spanish enemy's barbaric and foolish actions. These cartoons were full of sharp humor and meaning. One well-known picture showed Jenkins clutching his severed ear with a pained but determined look, while Spain was depicted as a dangerous person brandishing a shining dagger. The seriousness of the incident was emphasized by captions like, "The ear that shook an empire," which also offered incisive societal commentary. The imagery's impact extended widely because it was memorable and approachable due to the blend of humor and seriousness. In response, the British public showed Jenkins a great deal of sympathy and support. He was viewed as an unintentional hero who defied injustice and persecution rather than just a victim. Government officials were under intense pressure to act decisively and firmly against Spain as a result of this wave of patriotism. The political push toward war was propelled by public opinion. There were, nevertheless, some countercurrents to the wave of enthusiasm. Soon after, skeptics and satirists began to appear, wondering if inflating a comparatively minor personal injury was worth entangling the entire country in an expensive and protracted war. In the midst of the fervent demands for vengeance, the press was regularly filled with incisive criticisms, sardonic essays, and parody poetry that ridiculed the strange circumstance. Jenkins's ear swiftly established itself in British culture. Despite the conflicting responses, the image of the severed ear became profoundly ingrained in the public consciousness, thanks to a plethora of cartoons, popular songs sung in bars, and comedy plays presented in theaters. The ear became a symbol of the strength of truth, narrative, and national identity. After transcending its physical form, the responses from the public and media went much beyond simple curiosity or sensationalism. They represented a civilization ready to make its mark on the world stage and thirsty for justice. The ear evolved into a symbol of pride, national cohesion, and a shared call to action against alleged foreign aggression. Jenkins's story, which began with that small cut of flesh, moved people from all walks of life and brought the country together around a cause that was both intensely personal and widely political. British commanders were forced to take immediate action as a result of the pressure it produced, which ultimately resulted in the start of the War of Jenkins' Ear. The British public was far more than a passive observer in this regard. They played a crucial role in shaping the events, transforming what could have been a small skirmish into a confrontation that was both geopolitical and symbolic. The war came to represent the strength of popular opinion, the media's sway, and the lasting effects of a personal tale turned into a national emblem. Following the widespread public interest in Robert Jenkins's story and his amputated ear in England, officials soon realized that there was a golden opportunity to further long-term strategic objectives that went much beyond a personal grievance. This was a well-managed moment inside a convoluted web of political, military, and diplomatic calculations rather than just a story of personal retaliation. The public, an increasingly outspoken press, and fervent lawmakers all put tremendous pressure on the British government to react forcefully to Spain's alleged insult. In addition to causing public unhappiness, ignoring the small ear-cutting episode endangered Britain's colonial interests and important commercial routes, especially in the rich Caribbean. Leaders were aware that inaction would be interpreted as weakness, which could give Spain more confidence and damage Britain's reputation internationally. British officials responded by getting ready to put more diplomatic pressure on Spain. This entailed a flurry of formal correspondence, requests for apologies and compensation, and talks. Spain, however, was not interested in taking the situation further, calling it a minor affair that was unworthy of the political unrest that was developing on the other side of the channel. The British were just made more irate and determined by this careless attitude. In order to prepare for the potential of a military conflict, England significantly increased the size of its naval fleet in the Caribbean as tensions rose. In addition to safeguarding British interests, political advisors contended that demonstrating firmness and decisiveness was crucial in assuring a restless populace that the government was doing everything within its power to counteract Spanish brutality and aggressiveness. Spain, on the other hand, was anything but passive. In order to counter any possible English actions, the Spanish Empire quickly modified its defense strategies, fortifying key ports and forts, and preparing its naval forces. The two empires' diplomatic interactions became more chilly, tinged with mistrust and flimsy threats. Each side was hesitant to compromise, yet cautious about starting an open fight, turning the Caribbean into a powder keg. Some doubtful voices surfaced in Britain's political and intellectual circles under this tense environment. Some politicians and intellectuals warned against using what was essentially a little personal affair as an excuse for going to war. They cautioned that launching a war too soon may plunge the country into an expensive, needless fight that would deplete resources, take lives, and have no assurance of victory. However, the wave of popular indignation and political momentum calling for action made it difficult for these opposing viewpoints to acquire traction. With passionate statements citing Jenkins' story as a symbol of justice and national honor, parliamentary debates grew more heated. Strong support from a variety of political groups helped to increase the volume of calls for war. Despite its ugly appearance, the ear had evolved into a strong emblem that could unite the nation's determination. In addition to military preparations, England weakened Spain's position through a number of commercial and economic policies. These included heightened smuggling efforts aimed at upsetting Spain's profitable colonial trade networks and embargoes aimed at Spanish commodities. Britain's broader strategy to obtain an advantage in the Caribbean and put pressure on Spain to submit included these economic tactics as a key component. As a result, Jenkins's minor personal catastrophe not only changed his life's trajectory, but also set the stage for a highly strategic conflict. It demonstrated how, in the political sphere, seemingly insignificant occurrences may be magnified to further far-reaching goals, transforming individual episodes into the impetus for historic war and personal misery into a national cause. With the official declaration of the War of Jenkins' Ear, a period of unanticipated repercussions and significant events began. The balance of power in the world was put to the test. Diplomatic ties changed, and naval conflicts raged throughout the Caribbean. In the midst of all of this, Jenkins's ear continued to be a distinctive and timeless symbol, a reminder of how one tale, a small piece of flesh, could reverberate through time and influence the destiny of entire empires. The official declaration of war between England and Spain in 1739 signaled the start of a new, turbulent era in the history of Caribbean disputes. Following months of growing tension, diplomatic bickering, and unrelenting public pressure stoked by the tale of Robert Jenkins's severed ear, this conflict was not always big and spectacular. Though, in this unstable maritime theater, turmoil, confusion, and astonishing surprises were present at every turn. Naval fleets from Spain and Britain were quickly mobilized as the announcement reverberated throughout both countries. Tracing back to a little fragment of an ear, ships were getting ready to travel to the Caribbean. The exact location where this strange conflict had been started. Although sailors were ordered to prepare for conflict, not everyone was enthusiastic. Many crew members and even some officers questioned the appropriateness of getting involved in a war over an incident that some believed had been exaggerated by political scheming and public opinion. It was extremely difficult to plan and coordinate the ships. There were few supplies. Many ships were still being repaired from earlier wars, and men frequently lacked the comprehensive training required for the demands of naval combat. During these hazy early days, commanders had to deal with the mental strain of entering a war tainted by uncertainty and controversy. In addition to the physical perils of the sea, they also had to maintain discipline and morale. The battle was not limited to the ocean. Anticipating conflict, coastal fortresses and forts were strengthened throughout the Caribbean. In an effort to obtain tactical advantages, both sides organized massive landing operations, targeted at seizing key ports and cutting off the enemy's supply routes. However, these plans encountered significant challenges. The conduct of military campaigns was impeded by hot tropical weather, challenging terrain, and vigorous defensive opposition. Moments of humor and human error added unexpected laughter to the tight environment amidst the solemnity of war preparations. An entire fleet was lost, owing to chart confusion in one particularly notable occasion, and it took them days to reassemble and locate their intended rendezvous spot. Occasionally, sailors who were not acclimated to unexpected, powerful gusts stumbled and caused mishaps on deck, necessitating brief stops to tend to injuries or broken rigging. Even if they were annoying at the time, these accidents were later told with astonishment and hilarity. In addition to tension and fatigue, the early days of the war were characterized by cautious optimism on both sides. Each sailor recognized that they were engaged in a struggle that could alter not only their own fates, but also the futures of their countries. Anticipation and the weight of history bearing down on them pervaded the air. The War of Jenkins' Ear, a chapter full of remarkable, tumultuous, and occasionally humorous episodes, officially entered history thanks to a powerful mix of fury over Jenkins' Ear narrative and deeper political and economic concerns. This conflict, which began as a personal injury but developed into a full-fledged imperial conflict, would have a lasting impact on the Caribbean seas and the wider world. The War of Jenkins' Ear was not at all like the fanciful, heroic conflicts that are frequently depicted in epics or novels. Rather, it turned into a protracted, tiresome battle that tried the patience of even the most seasoned sailors and was characterized by mayhem, bewilderment, and humorous moments. What ought to have been a brief display of naval power turned into years of pointless battles and maddening deadlocks. Fleets engaged in tight pursuits, brief attacks, and abrupt retreats over the huge Caribbean Sea, with naval conflicts commonly ending in indecisive shootouts where cannon fire missed its mark, or fleets broke apart before a decisive victory could be obtained. In other cases, ships crashed with their own comrades, while in others, guns were fired and harmlessly splashed into the water, adding layers of uncertainty and unexpected disasters to the war. However, the threats that sailors had to deal with went much beyond enemy fire. Scurvy, dysentery, and fever swept through personnel that were already weak from inadequate diet and unhygienic circumstances, making disease a constant murderer on board ships. The men's spirits were weakened by hunger, and their suffering was exacerbated by the tropical heat and humidity. Swords and cannonballs did not kill as many sailors as disease and mishaps. Life at sea grew more difficult and frustrating. When sailors did have brief periods of relaxation, they used stories, jokes, and teasing to distract themselves from their constant anxieties and homesickness. Even these brief breaks were frequently accompanied by tension, though, as crowded quarters and the stress of combat preparation resulted in frequent arguments and sporadic fights, which commanders like Robert Jenkins had to expertly diffuse to keep the peace. There were no simple wins in the struggle on land either. In the face of challenging terrain, well-prepared defenders, and the erratic Caribbean weather, amphibious landing operations intended to seize major ports and fortifications frequently failed. While enemy resistance was strong and resolute, progress was sluggish and dangerous due to harsh jungles, swamps, and rocky beaches. Commanders were irritated, and morale was lowered by these setbacks. Neither side was prepared to back down or admit defeat in spite of multiple setbacks. Without resulting in major territorial gains or abrupt changes in the balance of power, the war continued to drag on, turning into an expensive and protracted conflict that depleted manpower, used enormous amounts of resources, and caused heavy losses. In the end, the War of Jenkins' Ear came to represent protracted, disorderly combat, characterized by unnecessary mistakes, lost chances, and the haze of battle, but it also demonstrated the men's tenacity and spirit of combat sailors and soldiers who faced danger, uncertainty, and adversity with unwavering determination. This protracted struggle serves as a warning about the costs of war that are motivated as much by popular mood and symbolism as by well-defined military goals. It serves as a reminder that underlying the epic tales of history are human tales of perseverance, adversity, and fortitude, that influence the course of empires and have endured across time. The War of Jenkins' Ear ended without a definite winner, akin to a protracted, tiresome battle in which both sides were just too exhausted to fight any longer. Although there was no dramatic conclusion or pivotal conflict that permanently tipped the scales, the conflict left behind important political, economic, and social scars that were felt much beyond the Caribbean. Above all, the crisis demonstrated how delicate and complicated international relations were in the 18th century. Empires fought a complex war to safeguard their economic interests, assert geopolitical might, and defend trade routes, in addition to squabbling for territory and glory. The struggle demonstrated the complex interplay between public opinion, military might, and diplomacy, where even a personal grievance, like Jenkins's amputated ear, might serve as a trigger. Furthermore, the campaign revealed significant flaws in the command and management of the battle at the time. Both maritime and land engagements were marked by countless errors, misunderstandings, and chaotic situations, some of which were almost comical. The fog of war was thick, and unpredictability and inadequate coordination frequently undermined strategy. The conflict had a negative economic impact. Revenues from colonial commodities were severely impacted, merchant shipping was exposed to greater risks, and trade routes throughout the Caribbean were disrupted. As the danger of pirate assaults or naval conflicts increased, commerce slowed or stopped completely in many ports and villages. The colonies themselves took the brunt of the damage, as the continual fighting and military demands caused local economies to become unstable. These economic disruptions had an impact on livelihoods far beyond the front lines, reaching European markets. In terms of politics, the conflict strained ties between the major countries and imparted important but expensive lessons. Long after the war ended, Spain and England maintained their intense rivalry, each redoubling their efforts to prepare for future battles. The unsolved tensions loomed large, laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The incident served as a diplomatic reminder of the precarious equilibrium between war and peace, as well as the powerful effect of popular opinion and symbolic actions in determining governmental policy. The war had a profound social impact on the families of those who served. Communities had to deal with loss and uncertainty as sailors and soldiers returned home injured, missing, or dead. People's responses were divided. Some questioned the validity and worth of a war that that was started by what appeared to be a little personal incident, while others maintained a strong sense of patriotism and support for the cause. Discussions about justice, national interest, and the human costs of empire building were sparked by the war. Despite all of this complication, Jenkins' ear continued to be a potent symbol of both individual injustice and the extraordinary ability of individual tales to shape the course of history. His tale demonstrated how minor, seemingly unimportant incidents may have a major impact on public opinion and political choices by reverberating through a nation's history. Future generations' perspectives on politics and history were influenced by the memory of the War of Jenkins' Ear. It evolved into a warning story and a moment of contemplation about the nature of power, the reasons behind and effects of war, and the elusive pursuit of justice in international affairs. It reminded spectators that history is a dynamic narrative made up of individual tales, societal beliefs, and irrevocable scandals, rather than merely a dry record of dates and conflicts. Ultimately, Jenkins's ear represented the human and unpredictable aspects of history, and was more than just a disfigured bodily part. It demonstrated the intricate relationship between political aspirations and personal misery, as well as how a single act of cruelty may incite the wrath of an entire empire and alter the trajectory of world events. Robert Jenkins and his strange, amputated ear have become an inseparable part of history, not because of significant victories or valiant deeds, but rather because of the incredible force that a seemingly little incident can possess. Jenkins, the sea captain who lost his ear, became a representation of bravery, tenacity, and the oddities of history that are worth remembering. Jenkins was no longer a little-known person lost in the seafaring archives following the War of Jenkins' Ear. His name and tale were frequently mentioned in folklore, history narratives, and even in plays and satirical cartoons of the day, carefully maintained in a tiny box. The tiny piece of his ear became a vivid reminder of not only one man's anguish, but also of an entire age characterized by power struggles, shifting alliances, and imperial conflict. It stood for the entwining of national destiny with personal tragedy. The image of the captain with the severed ear has persisted through ages, perpetuated in popular consciousness as evidence that occasionally a minor incident, a personal story, may rock the world to its core. Despite the fact that very little is known of Jenkins's life after the war, his hideous yet potent ear transcended its physical form to become a symbol of justice and truth, serving as a reminder that unexpected and profoundly personal events frequently affect history. The lessons learned from Jenkins' tale and the conflict it sparked are still incredibly applicable today. They serve as a reminder that history is much more complex than dry facts, dates, or printed maps. The lives, choices, feelings, and occasionally the most bizarre situations that characterize human experience are all weaved into this tapestry. Jenkins' story pushes us to see past the overarching plots and consider the people whose bravery, suffering, and tenacity alter the course of history. More significantly, the tale imparts a timeless lesson about the strength of human voices amidst the intricacies of power and politics. Sometimes the simplest things, a severed ear, an impassioned testimony, a single act of defiance, can start a fire that has the power to change history in a world that is frequently ruled by enormous armies and empires. That spark was Jenkins's ear, which changed the course of international affairs and paved the path for a whole country's response. As a result, Robert Jenkins is regarded as both the incomplete ear captain and a striking representation of the peculiar, comical, and incredibly human aspects of history. Generation after generation is still moved by his narrative, which serves as a reminder of the timeless value of truth, the bravery required to confront injustice, and the enormous impact that even the tiniest things may have in the vast scheme of human affairs. Jenkins's ear serves as a reminder of the erratic ways that individual tales and world events can collide in historical documents, museums, and cultural memory. It pushes us to value the voices of people whose experiences and deeds have a profound impact on the world. The sailors, the everyday people, the unintentional heroes. As time goes on, Jenkins' legacy and his odd ear prompt contemplation on the nature of justice, the fallout from political aspirations, and the personal tales at the center of history. His ear is still a reminder of a long-gone conflict, but it also serves as a source of inspiration, reminding us that every person's tale has the capacity to upend entire empires, alter people's perspectives, and create new history. Images of violent hurricanes, enemy warships, and a burning tropical sun typically come to mind when we consider the perils that sailors encountered during lengthy trips through the Caribbean in the 18th century. However, Rat's adversary that may have been even more crafty and unrelenting were concealed in the little, shadowy nooks of those wooden vessels. These little animals were some of the most tenacious and feared enemies that sailors would encounter when traveling. They were a less glamorous, but no less dangerous foe. At that time, shipboard living was already difficult, claustrophobic, and frequently unclean. In the dark, damp depths of both trade and warships, rats thrived. They ate valuable food supplies and tended to keep the crew afloat during lengthy, unpredictable journeys. Gnawed through ropes, wood, and equipment, and reproduced quickly. Rats were considered by sailors to be more than just annoyances. They were true saboteurs who threatened both the ship's supplies and morale. Crews mostly relied on the ship's cats, their own special forces, to control the rat infestation because there were no modern rodent control techniques available. However, cats were not trustworthy allies. They frequently went away or hid during strong storms or odd and terrifying water phenomena, leaving the males to defend themselves against these persistent intruders. Sailors developed complex and frequently comical extermination tactics to battle the rat issue. Rats were occasionally lured out into the open using powerful wine as bait, and homemade traps were built from whatever materials were available. Despite varying degrees of success, captured rats were indiscriminately thrown into the water. Rats outwitted the guys most of the time, chewing their way back to the food supplies and avoiding traps, which made the crew's sleepless evenings longer. A crew member named Jack is said to have chased a particularly brazen rat across the deck after consuming too much rum, according to a story that is especially well liked among sailors. In a hilarious yet dangerous twist of fate, Jack and the rat fell into the sea together. Luckily, Jack was saved by his fellow sailors, but the rat disappeared into the ocean. Unbeaten, a humorous story that became part of the ship's legend. Rats were a cause of stress and contention for the crew. In addition to being a practical issue, sailors competed to be the ones in charge of handling the infestation, which led to innumerable arguments and blame games over rats. A major flaw that occasionally led to furious disputes or even fistfights was the failure to control the rodent population. These minor conflicts might easily turn into major ones in the cramped, high-stress atmosphere of a ship, making life at sea even more difficult. Under these circumstances, the lives of soldiers such as Robert Jenkins become not just a narrative of conflicts with foreign foes, but also a demonstration of perseverance in the face of the more routine yet unrelenting hardships of everyday ship life. Fighting rats was a never-ending task, a persistent annoyance that influenced the rhythms of life on board and added to the rich, complex image of Caribbean marine life. The struggle against these terrible vermin and the more significant battles with pirates and empires underscore the intricacy of sailors' existence. There were numerous threats in this environment, ranging from enemy cannonballs to small teeth. And surviving required not only bravery and skill but also fortitude, resourcefulness, and occasionally a sense of humor. The innumerable minor conflicts, such as those involving rats, that characterized the everyday existence of sailors during this time period must thus be remembered in addition to Jenkins and his notorious ear. These tales give history life and serve as a reminder that beneath the epic tales of power and conflict, there were real people navigating both common and unique difficulties on the tumultuous Caribbean seas. In addition to the constant conflict with opponents, storms, and the vast ocean, life on board ships in the 18th century also involved a daily struggle with something that may seem unimportant to us now: food. However, the ship's meal was a topic of both frightening and humorous tales for the sailors traversing the Caribbean seas, a testament to adversity, ingenuity, and solidarity in the face of adversity. Bread, or more precisely, hardtack, was the staple of this maritime diet. Don't picture freshly baked bread that are warm and aromatic. Hardtack, on the other hand, was made of dry enda, rock-hard biscuits that cooked for months without going bad. These biscuits were so durable that sailors jokingly said that if you could chew hardtack, you had the necessary skills to withstand the roughness of the ocean. Some also threw the cookies like stones as their tempers flared, using them as makeshift weapons during arguments. The foundation of endurance food was hardtack, which was harsh but necessary. Salted meat, either beef or pork, that had been highly salted to sustain lengthy journeys, was eaten alongside the hardtack. The meat became almost inedible after weeks or months on board. It was so tough and salty that few people dared to touch it without thoroughly soaking or boiling it. If sailors were fortunate, they may be given dry beans or sweet potatoes, which are dull and uninteresting foods, yet are bursting with vitality to keep up with their hard work. Shipboard storage conditions were far from optimal. The already worn-out personnel were further weakened by food poisoning and other illnesses brought on by the frequent spoiling or contamination of food. Imagine sailors struggling every day with bland tastes, hunger, and the ever-present danger of illness, a struggle as difficult as battling the storm or the enemy. Sailors frequently used mealtimes as opportunities for humor to lift their spirits. As eating contests gained popularity, men would challenge one another to eat astronomically large quantities of salted pork or hardtack. Despite the obvious agony, seafarers laughed as they related stories of these feasts, describing their frantic and frequently comical attempts to find happiness in scarcity. Creativity occasionally flowered in unexpected ways, such as soaking hardtack in seawater to soften it, or showing off by boldly eating the saltiest, roughest pieces of flesh. Rum, the so-called divine gift of the sea, must be mentioned in any depiction of life aboard a ship. Rum gave sailors the comfort and fortitude they needed to face stress, exhaustion, and the cold. It was a valuable resource that was either utilized as money or given out in daily portions, but there were two sides to rum. Although it improved morale, it also led to a lot of fights and internal strife, making it more difficult for the captain to keep the peace and maintain discipline. The constant food thieves, rats, and other tiny animals who infiltrated storage spaces to consume the priceless supplies were another problem. Food became even more scarce and valuable as a result of these furry raiders, which led to annoyance and intense attempts to safeguard the stocks. Anger and a reluctant admiration for the rodent's perseverance coexisted in naval mythology as tales of rats sharing meals with sailors spread. A vibrant and realistic depiction of Caribbean ship life was produced by the combination of all these components Every meal was both a necessity and a task in this society, where comedy and adversity coexisted. The sailor's ability to persevere and find joy in the face of hardship was demonstrated by the terrifying ship food, which served as a daily reminder of their fortitude. We learn more about the human side of maritime history through stories of hardtack, salted meat, shenanigans driven by rum, and the never-ending fight against rats. The little, shared experiences that formed men's connections and kept them afloat on the choppy Caribbean waters were just as important to life at sea as fights and expeditions. In addition to the perils of war and storms, life aboard Caribbean ships in the 18th century was also rife with the continual threat of workplace accidents, which were so common and occasionally so ridiculously humorous that they left seamen torn between tears and laughter. These incidents demonstrate how laughter and danger frequently went hand in hand and provide a realistic, vivid picture of marine life. The guns, which are the heart of a warship's power and protection, were one of the most frequent causes of mishaps. Under challenging circumstances, gunners loaded and fired enormous iron balls using methods that were anything but accurate. There were many misfires in cannonballs that frequently missed their objectives by a large margin, occasionally injuring their own crew members inadvertently. One especially memorable incident was when a cannon fired too soon, sending a sailor flying across the deck with such force that the entire crew burst out laughing. The poor soldier, however, was not amused and received a reprimand from the captain along with some bruises. In addition to cannon accidents, handling firearms and explosives was dangerous by nature. Gunpowder was unstable in the wet, salty climate, and without contemporary safety precautions, unexpected, horrifying explosions may happen. The crew was startled by these explosions, which sent seamen flying all over the deck in a panic. The resulting chaotic scenes mixed real fear with desperate attempts to retake control. It was dangerous even to go about the ship. Because of the erratic seas in the Caribbean, decks were frequently slippery with seawater, which increased the likelihood of slips and falls. Occasionally, sailors came into contact with heavy rigging and cargo, fell into the small, dim holes below deck, or tumbled overboard. Crews would constantly relate stories of painful, yet oddly humorous, fights, which would eventually become part of the ship's collective culture. These stories, conveyed with grimaces and laughs, highlighted the dangers sailors faced on a regular basis. Frequent interpersonal confrontations were further exacerbated by the strains of long travels and cramped quarters. Small arguments over food rations, sleeping arrangements, or control of specific onboard areas might soon turn into major ones. Duels or fistfights occasionally resulted from these arguments, upsetting the fragile order on board. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Jenkins frequently had to act as a mediator to bring about peace. Life at sea gained color from unusual and memorable experiences. Intoxicated sailors occasionally fell overboard, stopping watch rotations while desperate searches began in the moonlight. Sometimes entire fleets were diverted by navigational errors, which led them into uncharted waters and created uncertainty that interfered with coordinated operations. Despite the possibility of danger, these accidents frequently turned amusing in retrospect. Even while these mishaps might seem funny or unimportant, they demonstrated the extreme risk and ongoing stress that come with living at sea. Sailors faced constant obstacles from their surroundings and their personal frailties, in addition to foreign adversaries. A multifaceted experience of maritime life, characterized by difficulties, perseverance, and a bond formed through shared adversity, is revealed by the fusion of humor and danger. The story of Robert Jenkins and his unusual ear sticks out among these vivid tales of peril and accident as a memorable and odd emblem, a personal experience that resonated through the vibrant chaos of mariners' lives and the larger, geopolitical challenges of the Caribbean era. His tale serves as a reminder that history is not just about great conflicts and heroic leaders, but also about the everyday, occasionally strange events that mold people's lives and nations. Commanders have the vital duty of leading their forces to victory in any conflict, planning intricate operations, and making snap decisions that have the power to change the course of history. However, even the most experienced commanders were lost in the turbulent and unpredictable environment of the Caribbean seas of the 18th century, both literally and figuratively, as they struggled to recover from tactical errors that left entire fleets in disarray. Imagine a commander who is responsible for directing and coordinating a fleet of warships suddenly losing track of their position, misinterpreting a badly designed map, or being confused about their direction. Considering how primitive naval navigation was at the time, such mistakes were remarkably frequent. Fragile compasses and charts were quickly damaged or destroyed by storms and choppy seas, forcing sailors and commanders to rely on their intuition and good fortune. Precise placement was a frequent challenge because of the ocean's wide, featureless expanse. Fleets were frequently instructed to assemble at certain strategic places, such as important harbors or meeting spots that were essential for carrying out coordinated attacks. However, a single minor error, like one ship miscalculating a landmark or going the incorrect way, may compel the entire fleet to make adjustments, losing valuable hours or even days. The enemy was able to relocate forces, build defenses, or launch a preemptive strike thanks to these delays. A tactical nightmare might result from a single navigational misstep. Many commanders experienced laugh or cry moments that blended disbelief and frustration. Commanders frequently lost communication with other ships during combat, which compelled them to pause offensives and focus on locating stragglers before proceeding. The pressure of these circumstances occasionally caused people to make snap decisions, which led to disorganized or inefficient actions that wasted chances and increased the risk of needless losses. The era's naval tactics lacked the seamless synchronization one might anticipate, and were frequently rudimentary by today's standards. Due to inadequate communication and uneven training, fleets occasionally behaved more like disorganized groups of individual ships than as a cohesive force. As a result, there was chaos on the battlefield, as crews and commanders tried to keep things under control amid the noise of breaking waves and cannon fire. These tactical blunders occasionally resulted from intense disputes between officers and commanders, rather than from ineptitude. Awkward divisions and tension that impacted operational effectiveness resulted from heated discussions over strategy, line of command, and priorities that occurred not only in official meetings, but also on ship decks. Such disagreements could cause conflicting instructions or postpone important decisions, greatly complicating the conduct of war. Sailors saw some genuinely odd and amusing incidents during these difficult times. On one occasion, a commander completely forgot his map and had to rely on a sailor with fast thinking to serve as a living map, running around the ship and indicating to other officers the proper paths. The team found the incident humorous and lighthearted, providing a moment's relief from the constant threats. There was more to life on Caribbean ships than ferocious combat, violent storms, and battling adversaries and crafty rats. Little, straightforward, but incredibly moving tales of love, friendship, and lighthearted banter that kept sailors' spirits high and helped them form relationships distant from home were hidden behind the hard reality. Sailors' love for one another never wavered. Even in the face of the constant difficulties and perils of sea life, they suffered from homesickness despite being away from their wives, friends, and family. But the ship became their second home. a floating community where fellow sailors shared happiness, sadness, and the infrequent closeness that comes with life at sea. Sailors gathered around improvised campfires to tell love stories while the waves lapped gently against the hull and the sky was full with stars. As their emotions remained afloat amidst limitless horizons, dreamy seamen would tell of their sweethearts waiting back home, whispering promises and hopes of reunion. Others related amusing tales of clumsy flirtation, lost dates in busy port towns, or romantic relationships, so dramatic they seemed fit for folk ballads. They turned to humor as a coping mechanism for stress and despair. The tension that threatened to smother spirits was broken by jokes, pointless mishaps, light-hearted antics, and stories about sea ghosts. These long journeys fostered friendship and fraternity. Alongside one another, they suffered hardships, shared scant food rations, kept each other safe, and dreamed of tranquil lives beyond the water. Sometimes strong, these ties served as sources of fortitude and resiliency throughout the most trying circumstances. Love and shipboard rumors gave the narrative of the War of Jenkins' Ear more layers of warmth and color in this human tapestry. It serves as a reminder that this was a story about actual people, their feelings, aspirations, and basic joys navigating a huge and unpredictable ocean. Not just about conflicts and tactics, sailors needed to find ways to be positive amidst the chaos of the Jenkins' Ear fight and the great expanse of the sea. Games, singing sessions, and shared laughter were frequently the surprisingly easy ways to endure long, stress-filled days. Finding happiness was difficult on small ships where every meter of space was valuable. However, sailors were extremely inventive and used whatever they could to create amusement. A tiny drum or homemade percussion instrument would occasionally appear, leading to homegrown concerts that were frequently off-key, but brimming with emotion. Playing games became a pleasant diversion from stress and exhaustion. Friendly competition on the deck was ignited by games like quick-witted guessing, the largest stone toss, or the fastest rope climbing. The constant anxiety was reduced by the outbursts of laughter and companionship that these activities brought. A favorite activity was verbal duels, which were amusing arguments full of tall tales and inflated narratives. Everyone tried to show off their cunning and wit, but in the end, these discussions resulted in laughing, which united the group via light-hearted competitiveness and fun. Another essential kind of entertainment was storytelling. Sailors favored commonplace stories and amusing sea legends that bolstered their collective identity and spirit over terrifying tales or sinister mythology. By serving as a constant reminder of their common experience and resiliency, these tales strengthened team unity. Sailors relied on such basic amusements to help them forget about danger, illness, and homesickness. Through connection and laughter, they developed mental toughness that was necessary to withstand the unrelenting rigors of maritime combat. Thus, moments of play, music, and laughing revealed the human side of the Jenkins' Ear fight, despite its confusion and hardship. These encounters enhanced history's vividness, relatability, and humanity, which is a reflection of the people who experienced it. The Caribbean Sea was home to violent storms and constant natural hazards. In addition to being a tumultuous arena for naval conflicts and disorderly sailor life, even the most courageous sailor may be rendered dazed by the unrelenting power of nature, which was as much of an opponent as any hostile fleet for those who ventured to traverse these seas. Caribbean storms were notorious for their ferocity and abrupt start. The sun may be beaming warmly, and the sky clear and blue 1 minute, and then a fierce tempest may suddenly break forth without much notice. Winds raged like ancient devils let loose on the sea. As towering waves crashed against ships, Sailors braced themselves to balance their vessels, held ropes with a gritted determination, and, most importantly, did everything in their power to withstand the fury of the hurricane. Picture the terrifying scenes of men gathered on slick decks, trying to escape the roaring winds and whipping rain. As waves as high as mountains threatened to engulf their ship, many of these seemingly fatal events have been transformed into fabled stories of bravery, tenacity, and uncommon luck that have been passed down through the ages. The unpredictable nature of nature extended beyond hurricanes, abrupt whirlwinds, and torrential rains could confuse sailors and harm delicate navigational equipment. Fleets can be dispersed over large areas, requiring commanders to make arduous and nerve-wracking attempts to reassemble their forces. These difficulties made naval operations more complex and regularly put commanders' and crews' abilities to the test. Beneath the waves were secret dangers that went beyond the weather. Ships were always in danger from coral reefs and sharp rocks, which might sink them or leave them stranded far from help. Sharks were a fatal threat to sailors who were washed into the sea or dragged overboard during storms. Survival in this harsh environment required alertness and rapid adaptation. Surprisingly, sailors remained positive and friendly. Despite the ongoing tension and danger, they played pranks to decompress, joked, and reminisced about great triumphant and foolish experiences. This companionship served as more than just a diversion. It was an essential lifeline that enabled them to overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Natural hazards and stormy days become an integral part of Caribbean sea life. Woven into the experiences and tales of sailors, these encounters serve as timeless evidence of human fortitude, resiliency, and the determination to face nature's wrath. The tale of Robert Jenkins and his peculiar ear endured through these hardships as a unique emblem, a human thread woven throughout the region's stormy past, that served as a reminder to everyone who heard it of the intimate amidst the vast and the uncertain. Even though there was no clear winner in the War of Jenkins' Ear, it had a profound impact on the memories of those who experienced it and subsequent generations. The tumultuous years, absurd conflicts, and, of course, Jenkins's notorious ear story persisted in discussions and popular memory, even after seamen resumed their lives as battered ships made their way back to ports around the Caribbean and beyond. Although the oceans were a little calmer after the war, the effects of the fighting were still evident. Years of adversity and combat left many sailors with psychological and physical scars when they returned home. Family, relatives, and friends who died in the fighting left gaps that would never be filled. Some of them returned permanently disabled. Their pre-war futures of their lives forever changed. Stories of conflicts, stormy days, shipboard altercations, and close escapes were repeatedly recounted, warning of the dangers that awaited sailors and imparting lessons to future generations. Maritime communities have a rich oral history and a shared identity as a result of these stories. Although little much is known about Robert Jenkins's post-war personal life, his image and the tale of his ear endured. More than just a missing bodily part, the ear came to represent tenacity, bravery, and the ability of even the smallest voices to change the course of history. The legend of Jenkins was ingrained in popular culture, appearing in plays, ballads, and cartoons that enhanced the period's vibrant and engrossing historical story. The ear came to symbolize not only a conflict but also the human condition and the peculiar, surprising turns of history. Future generations learned important lessons about politics, diplomacy, and military from the war as well. It illustrated how seemingly insignificant or arbitrary factors may lead to significant shifts, and how individuals engaged required discernment, self-control, and cautious handling to negotiate the perilous waters of international relations. In the end, Jenkins's ear story serves as a reminder that history is influenced by a variety of sources, including human emotions, intimate tales, and unexpectedly significant moments. In addition to significant historical events and influential people, it is a story about how minor events may have a lasting impact on nations, identities, and history long after the canons have ceased to speak. Last but not least, the Jenkins ear conflict endures in folklore, history classes, and the hearts of people who value the odd, funny, and intriguing aspects of world history. Even though Jenkins's narrative and his ear may not have transformed the world right once, they did leave a lasting impression as evidence of the strength of common people and little things over a long period of time. Who would have guessed that one of the most bizarre and protracted battles in history could be started by a small piece of the body, a severed ear? In addition to being history, the tale of Robert Jenkins and the War of Jenkins' Ear is a monument to the enchanted force of insignificant incidents, the tenacity of common people, and the ways in which the most unlikely things may influence history. That ear is more than simply a missing body part. It is a representation of injustice and a spark that ignites the rage and will to fight of a people. It stands for the voice of the downtrodden who will not give up, demonstrating the ability of individual tales to sway entire nations. However, all of those tales, no matter how minor, should be shared, recalled, and treasured. Every setback and every stride leads to development and unfathomable power. You discover through losses that sometimes perseverance and acceptance are more important than instant success. Keep in mind that it's not always about winning or losing. The important thing is that you had the courage to take risks, overcome obstacles, and gain knowledge along the way. We genuinely learn the worth of life and the experiences that shape who we are during times when it seems like we have lost. Perhaps one day we will look back and smile because we overcame every obstacle with courage. Politics, economic interests, intrigue, and amusing military gaffes are all mixed together in the Jenkins ear conflict. It demonstrates that history is not just about great triumphs or terrible tragedies, but also about the experiences of common people, including their happy and sad moments. In the end, each stage of that trip is an essential component of your tale. Regardless of the result, the path of life is made whole by the little, occasionally painful or happy moments. I appreciate you following along on this bizarre journey with me. May you always have faith in your own power, a soft smile, and profound learning. No matter what obstacles you face tomorrow, you will have a memorable story in your hands and a restful night's sleep tonight. My warrior, good night.